So you were freelancing at the age of 19.
15 was my first freelance job.
How are you freelancing at 15?
They paid me, I think, $25 for it.
What is the story of your first $1,000 client? How did you get that?
The next client, I think I tried charging them like $8,000. Everybody says like double your rates. I did it 8 times because I was like, let's see. Yeah, I waited 21 years to work with Nike. If you're not doing Nike level work right now with the brands that we're getting, you're not going to do Nike level work. Nike's going to come to us because they see you doing Nike work with no budget. And once they see that, then they'll go, well, imagine if we gave you $10,000 or $50,000 or $100,000. Imagine what you could do with that if you're doing that with nothing.
My charge is like $10,000 and that person would say, no, I can only pay $8,000. So how do you raise that? Do you just say no, or do you have some techniques to bring them to that price?
If a client has a price that they want to pay, you can always negotiate the scope. If you say to a client, I'm charging $10,000 for this, and they say, why? What most people do is they say, well, my hourly rate is this much, and I think it's going to take this many hours. Instead of talking to them about that, talk to them about how much money it's going to make them. I'm charging you $10,000 because if I do this work in this way for you, given my experience and all the things I'm going to bring to the table, I think you're going to make an extra $200,000 this year. You might not make money on this one, but if you make them testimonial, that testimonial might make you double on the next one because it addresses something that the next client wants to do.
Let's assume that there's a UX designer with 2 years of experience. She has 2-3 case studies, a decent portfolio, doesn't know how to price, doesn't know who to message. What should she do now?
What I did in that scenario, and what I recommend for anybody who has the ability to do this, is to...
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Show. Today's guest is someone who is widely admired and respected in the entire UX community. His courses and books have helped designers at some of the world's most recognized companies, including Nike, Disney+, Meta, Google, Netflix, and more. Folks, get ready to learn from Dan Moll. Dan has been writing about design on his blog since 19 years, and today's episode he will share his topmost insights from being a designer, freelancer, and a consultant. If you're starting out as a designer, then his negotiating and pricing techniques will help you make a lot of extra money. Like always, you'll find detailed notes and call to actions both in the middle and at the end of this episode. All PDF notes will be free to download from the link in description. So without wasting any further time, let's get started. Hi everyone. Today we are hosting one of the most respected and admired brains in the world of UX and design systems. I am talking about none other than the one and only Mr. Dan Moll. Dan, welcome to the Cutting Edge Show.
Thank you so much. I don't know how comfortable I am with being called Mr. yet, but I think of my dad as Mr. I'm not quite Mr. yet.
It just naturally comes out of respect.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So Dan, we had put up a community post mentioning your arrival and students had a ton of questions. But the most common pattern was that you've been in the game since a very long time. You've been a designer, founder, entrepreneur. Did you plan any of this, and how are you able to switch so seamlessly?
I definitely did not plan any of this. I went to school to be a 3D animator. I wanted to work at Pixar. I wanted to make movies. And then I realized I wasn't very good at that. And I discovered design along the way. And I realized that I think as a kid, I was always interested in design, but I've never really knew that design was a thing until I got to university, until I got to college. I think I've been really blessed to have people in my life who have stopped and started things. My dad is an entrepreneur, even though I never thought of him as an entrepreneur. And so I think I've just been around a lot of people who start things and stop things and try things and see how it goes. And so I think that's kind of built into me from what I've observed.
And were you always creative, or did it take some time to become a good designer?
It definitely took some time to be a good designer, but I think I've always been creative in the same way that I think that everyone is creative. Kids, they don't. You have to ask them to stop drawing or stop playing with Legos or playing outside or building things. And so I think we're all built with that. We're all kind of born with that. It's just when we become adults, people stop that stuff. People say mean things to us, and we stop singing and we stop playing and we stop drawing. For me, I used to draw nonstop as a kid, and I was lucky that my parents and my grandparents who I lived with and grew up with, they would always draw with me and color with me and make music together. And so it was just encouraged when I was a kid a lot.
And do you see a similar pattern in the upcoming designers? Do you see a shift in how people see design now?
I think it's different now than when I was coming up because I think when I was coming up, the web was sort of growing up too. So people didn't really know, like everybody was doing a lot of different things. I remember learning in school and even before school, playing around with Photoshop and Illustrator and Dreamweaver and Flash and Director and like writing programming and, all of that stuff. I think nowadays it's tough because I think now people understand that design can drive business. And so a lot of times it becomes more serious. And sometimes I think it should be, but I think it raises the stakes on how much pressure designers feel to perform and to be really good. Whereas I think when I was kind of coming up, I don't think the pressure to be really good was as much, because I think a lot of people were just playing.
We had Sir Don Norman on the show, and we were discussing how even in a company, very few companies actually go to a designer to take product decisions. Do you feel the same? Do you feel like designers still need to get a seat at the table?
Absolutely. And I mean, talk about OG, somebody who's been in the game for a long time. Don Norman, I mean, he's been in this. I remember reading his stuff when I was in school and when I was kind of learning this stuff. I think that designers are still known for just making things pretty. And that's definitely part of the job. I think that we should be known for doing that. But I think we haven't done a good job as an industry in making ourselves known for what we really do well, which is what does a designer do well? We get to think about things. We're really good at observing things and thinking about how they can be better. And I think a lot of designers sell themselves short because they think that the only way that they can make something better is to make it pretty or make it more beautiful. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think that if we apply that to other areas of our lives and careers, we could do a lot more good in this world.
How do you think a beginner designer then approach? For example, if there's a self-taught designer who doesn't have access to such smart people or colleges, how should she navigate through this path?
I was really lucky when I was in school. I had a teacher who basically taught me how to learn. I think that was one of the things that was really great about working with him and he taught me how to have taste. And what he said is like, everyone's born with taste. It's just different taste. And the way to develop your taste is you look at things that you like, even if you don't know why you like them. And you measure where your skills are around that and against that, and start to articulate what you like about something. Do you like the colors? Do you like the typefaces? Do you like the patterns? Do you like, what do you like about it? And then if you do that for more and more things, you start to realize, oh, my taste is actually for high contrast imagery. My taste is actually for illustrative things. My taste is for heavy photography on something. Like you start to develop your own taste. And I think a lot of designers don't have that. Nobody taught them how to do that, especially the self-taught designers. And so it's hard to develop your own taste other than going as far as like, I like this thing, I don't like this thing, but we're never pushed to articulate, why do you like it? What is it that resonates with you? And be able to verbalize that to yourself so that you can kind of look at those things on your own. So I think that we need more practice at that. I think the more designers, especially the younger designers and newer designers, the more they do that stuff, the better, the higher their taste becomes, the more accurately they're able to measure, oh, here's where I am against my taste. And then your job then becomes to do enough practice to fill that gap, to get closer and closer to your taste level.
That's very interesting now that you've pointed it out, because anytime I see a movie, I would see it from an editor's lens, a photographer's lens, as a marketer's lens. Do you have the same habit of breaking down things?
I can't turn it off. I remember, my wife says to me all the time, sometimes we go to restaurants now, and my wife is not a graphic designer or a UI designer, but now because of being with me for so long, we met when we were kids. When we go to a restaurant, she notices the typography on the menu, and there's certain places where we'll go to, and she'll go, the menu's set in papyrus. I don't know if we can eat here. So it's like it's one of those skills that once you have it, you can't turn it off. And so for me, it's like it's movies, it's advertisements, it's billboards, it's the bus driving by. I'm always trying to identify like, oh, that's a nice color palette, or like that's a nice, that I know that typeface. So it's hard to turn off once you have it, I think.
And I saw that you've consulted like such great brands, for their design system. So many things. Like, how did you even get into this? Because it's so difficult to convince such a big brand to hire you. So how do you crack that?
So part of it is just the right place in the right time. When I was in college, I got a really great internship through my college, and I just took it because it was an internship. I probably would have taken anything at that point, and I was lucky that I got to work with some really great people at that internship. So I was a design intern, and the people who are my art directors and my creative directors, I then went on to work with them. Like they left that company, they went to another company, they would bring me on as a junior designer, which is a promotion for me as an intern. So I think that networking, networking is such a tough term. I think it's just making friends with people and connecting with people and maintaining those connections over many, many years, I think you start to get that. And I remember one of my creative directors said to me, I think I was maybe a junior designer or a mid-level designer. I remember complaining to him that like, how come we get all these clients that like are no-name brands? I want to work with HBO and I want to work with Nike. And he said, Dan, if you're not doing Nike level work right now with the brands that we're getting, you're not going to do Nike level work. Nike's going to come to us because they see you doing Nike work with no budget. And once they see that, then they'll go, well, imagine if we gave you $10,000 or $50,000 or $100,000. Imagine what you could do with that if you're doing that with nothing. If you're sourcing your own photography, if you're doing your own illustration, if you're doing your own motion design, then what'll happen when we pair you with an illustrator or with a photographer or with an art director is the work will just get that much better. But they have to see that stuff in you already. And so, I was lucky to have that advice early on in my career, and I started approaching work that way. It's like, all right, I know we're only working for a local painting company right now, but I'm going to treat it as if we're working for one of the biggest brands in the world, and I'm going to see what I can bring to the table. And then luckily over time, it turned into Nike, it turned into HBO, it turned into Epson, it turned into all these brands that I had admired and really wanted to work with. But it's because I was always trying to do that kind of work early on when I wasn't working with those brands. It's sort of the mantra I think a lot of people have, like you dress for the job that you want. And so, I started dressing for the job that you want in your portfolio. And, one day you'll get there. It might not be Nike. I waited 21 years to work with Nike. But along the way, I worked with so many other clients that might as well have been Nike, even though Nike was my dream client. And so I think a lot of good things come if you have that mindset and if you kind of keep that mindset toward the work.
That's very well said. I feel like people don't understand the concept of networking. They feel like sending out an outreach message or exchanging cards is networking. But as you said, you stayed patient for 20 years, 21 years, you worked yourself up. How do you recommend to approach this entire networking mindset? Like, how does this networking and maintaining relationships even work?
I'm really encouraged by the creator economy right now. I think that a lot of people are talking about the same idea without using the word networking. So if you go to any creator workshop or you watch people's YouTube videos or anything like that, a lot of what they're talking about is give stuff away for free. Like just create value for someone. Like that's really what networking is. Networking is not trying to meet someone to get something from them. It's trying to meet someone to give something to them, and then maybe one day they'll give to you and maybe they don't, but no expectation of return. And so I think there's a lot in the action of that where you meet somebody, maybe you could do them a favor. For me as a junior designer, I'm like, well, what favor can I do for them? Well, what I can do is I can be a really reliable person that they send their overflow work to. So that was the role that I had when I was networking with people. I didn't think of it as networking, but I was like, hey, if you have jobs that you turn away, but you want to send your client to somebody reliable, or if you have jobs that are too cheap for you, you're more expensive and this client can't pay your rates, would you send them to me? And I'm happy to give you a referral. I'm happy to give you a commission on it. I want to be a reliable person that you can send work to because that's a way that they can add value to their clients. So I would take people's scraps. I remember talking to lots of people and say like, anything you got that is work that you don't want to do, I'll do it. And that's the way that I made the early years of my career, was like doing stuff that I had no business doing, that I was like, I'll try it, I'll do it for cheap. I'll learn it because I had the ability to learn it when I was younger. And now that I'm older, I don't have as much time. I don't have as much, my opportunity cost is higher. And so, that time when I'm early in my career really was a time for me to make an investment in that. And, I'm lucky to see that investment pay off a lot of times now.
But it's so tough to imagine you being in that state. I would probably imagine you being like a straight shooter from day one. What age was this entire phase?
19, 20, something around there.
Oh, that's amazing. So you were freelancing at the age of 19?
Oh, 15 was my first freelance job, 15.
What? How were you freelancing at 15?
So I did a website for my church. My church there's a homeless ministry in my church, and I was like, I'll do the website. I was 15. They paid me, I think, $25 for it. And that, from my first job that I ever did, I was a professional freelance designer.
That is insane. And you did the code and the design like on HTML, CSS?
Not HTML, CSS. I did it in Dreamweaver. Photoshop and ImageReady, because that's what, so basically design the thing in Photoshop and then slice it up in ImageReady and put it together in tables. I didn't know anything about CSS. I didn't know anything about HTML. I just knew that these are tools where I can slice something up and put them back together again and then FTP them to a website. So that's enough. That's all I needed to know. And then I did that first job.
So, starting from 15 years of age at $25, what is the story of your first $1,000 client? How did you get that?
I got it through my cousin. My cousin is somebody, he dropped off the first copy of Photoshop to me. He's in IT, and he had a copy of Photoshop at work. He dropped off a CD to me and he said, "Hey, you should learn this." I was like, "All right." So he dropped off this copy to me. I learned Photoshop, and then I started doing little projects, for my church or my friends or my band or, fake projects. I used to draw my own comic book. I made my own comic book website, doing little side projects. And then he saw that stuff and he's like, "Hey, I have a client that is coming to his company to do work, but they were too expensive for that client." And he said, "Can I give it to you?" He's like, "I think it's probably $1,000." And I'm 16 years old, 17 years old, make $1,000. That's amazing. That's more money than I made at my $8 an hour job that I was working. And so it was all referrals. It was all word of mouth. And that was a great income for me when I was, 18 or 19 years old.
That is super cool. And did you have a tough time asking for a raise or asking for more money? A lot of creatives face this issue of charging their clients.
So for me, I was lucky in that freelance was always on the side of a full-time job. So especially when I got a job in design, I had internships and then I became a junior designer. So I was always working working full-time or even part-time while I was in school. And then freelance was just extra. So I was lucky that I wasn't freelancing full-time at that time. That's not the way that I had made my income. So freelance, I was very free, because if a client said no, it's not like I needed that money to eat. What I did freelance for was like, if me and my girlfriend, who's my wife now, like if we wanted to take a vacation, freelance would do that. If I wanted to buy a new camera, freelance would do that. If I wanted to get a new PlayStation, freelance would do that. If I wanted to get a new TV, freelance would do that. So like I used freelance as like supplemental income for me, and that allowed me to be very brave. I used to charge clients whatever I wanted because it didn't matter if they said no. So I would try to test stuff out. Like, from that $1,000 client, the next client, I think I tried charging them like $8,000. Everybody says like double your rates. I did it 8 times because let's see. And a bunch of them said no, but then one of them said yes. And then all of a sudden I'm making $8,000 on a project, right? It's like, so I was very brave in that. And luckily for me, now that I understood like, hey, people will pay for work that they think is valuable. Then when eventually 10 years later, I started my own agency, I have 10 years of experience of how to price, what people will pay, how to sell something, how to build a team, like all of that stuff. Those were all lessons that I had when I was free to do something. Whereas I think it's tough when you're freelancing full time. You got to make it work. So there's a lot of pressure to go, if I price is too high, if the client says no, that's a problem. And so people are very conservative about that because they don't have the freedom to take risks. And so, one of the things for me is if you can put yourself in a situation where you have the freedom to take risks, it gives you a lot of learning that you can take into something that just gives you more courage.
Yeah, I think the person who wins is the one who can leave the money at the table. And as you said that because you were willing to give it away, you would always have more leverage. But how do you navigate these conversations where you say that my charge is like $10,000 and that person would say, no, I can only pay 8,000. So how do you raise that? Do you just say no, or do you have some techniques to bring them to that price?
Yeah, I have a lot of techniques. So one of the things that I believe is that if a client has a price that they want to pay, you can always negotiate the scope. So I think what a lot of people always do with that, or what a lot of people do a lot of times is, they'll say, I'll charge you $10,000 for this. And then a client says, oh, we have $5,000. So then what do? They go, fine, I'll do it for $5,000. Well, the client just cut your budget in half. So what should you do? Cut the project in half, right? Because now now you're not compromising on the price. Because if you basically say this amount of work is worth this, and then a client says, I'll pay you half, and you say yes, then you just lied initially. And I think that's what gives pricing and freelancers and whatever a bad name, is that now it just seems like you're trying to get as much money as you can. And that's not really the key to pricing. It's not about getting the most money that you can. It's about giving your client something that is worth paying for. And so if you can do that, you can always negotiate on scope. If a client wants to cut your price by $1,000, cut $1,000 out of the work. So if a client said, hey, I'm going to pitch a website for $1,000 or $10,000, $100,000, whatever the price is, and the client says, oh, I don't have $1,000, I have $800. I go, great. How about I do one less page for you then? Right? It makes sense. We do that in all other areas of life. I want to buy this car with all the bells and whistles. Well, I don't have that much money, so you know what? I'll just skip the heated seats on this one. Like, we take features out depending on the price that we have. And so we can do the same thing when it comes to pricing too, is we can always negotiate the scope down. The other thing too is you can always say no. That's another trick that I use, is like the most leverage that you have is the easiest way to negotiate. So if you always have the ability to walk away from a project, that's great, right? Because then you can really stand by your price. Not everybody's always in that situation. I'm not always in that situation. Sometimes I'm like, I got to make rent this month, so I need this to happen. So you're not always in that situation, but however you can create the leverage for yourself, that's another technique too. And then the last thing I'll say is you can always talk to the client about value, right? And that's the thing that, I wrote a book about this, it's called Pricing Design. And the premise of that is the idea of value pricing, where if you say to a client, I'm charging $10,000 for this, and they say, why? What most people do is they say, well, my hourly rate is this much, and I think it's going to take this many hours. Instead of talking to them about that, talk to them about how much money it's going to make them. I'm charging you $10,000 because if I do this work in this way for you, given my experience and all the things I'm going to bring to the table, I think you're going to make an extra $200,000 this year. So who in their right mind wouldn't pay $10,000 to get $200,000? Like, I'll take that bet any day. So I think we can always, if we're talking to our clients about value, it's a much easier way to kind of raise those prices, and in an honest way, in an ethical way, not just you're just trying to make the most money that you can, or trying to take the client for as much money as they're willing to pay.
So let's take a user persona. Let's assume that there's a UX designer with 2 years of experience. She has 2-3 case studies, a decent portfolio. But she's not able to get her first client. She's reaching out, messaging people, doesn't know how to price, doesn't know who to message. What should she do now?
What I did in that scenario, and what I recommend for anybody who has the ability to do this, is to do the first project for free. If you're having trouble getting work, do the first project, not for free, I'm going to change that. Do the first project for a testimonial. That's the deal that you make with the client. Hey, I'll do this project for you without charging you any money, but what I need out of it is a testimonial from you. That's the deal. You could write that in the contract even, because testimonials are one of the things that help conquer price objections for the next client. So it's always having an eye toward what the next project is and what the next client is going to be, not necessarily this one. You might not make money on this one, but if you make the testimonial, that testimonial might make you double on the next one because it addresses something that the next client wants to do. That's also what helps people kind of make a name for themselves in something. If you do a project for one client that's e-commerce, and then that you do it for a testimonial that gets you the next paying e-commerce client, and that gets you the next higher paying e-commerce client, all of a sudden you've got 3 e-commerce projects in your portfolio. Maybe you can start building yourself as an e-commerce designer if that's the thing that you want to do. And now all of a sudden you have a specialty and you have a niche, and now there's a reason to choose you over that other designer who does everything. They do e-commerce, but they also do print, and they do video production, and they do editing, and they do sound design. Like, no one wants to pick them. They would rather pick the person, especially if it's the same price, they would rather pick the person who has more experience in e-commerce or more experience in the thing that they need solved. So the gateway to that a lot of times is do the first project for a testimonial, and then let that testimonial parlay you into the next project after that.
Before we go ahead, here are some lessons we've learned so far. Number 1, it's super important for all designers to find and refine their taste. Look at the things around you that catch your attention. Notice minor details like the colors, the typeface, patterns, etc. Think about what is it about them that drew your attention, and try to recreate that in your designs. Number 2, do your best work even if you're working on projects with smaller brands. Eventually, your dream clients will automatically be drawn to you because of your high quality work. Big brands eventually approach people who consistently do great work from day one. Number 3, most people see networking as a way to get something from new people. That barely works. Learn, become super good at what you do, and simply meet people without an agenda. Provide value to the people you meet and use events to get visibility. All you need is strong people, knowing you exist, and your skill level. Eventually, opportunities will find you. On number 4, learn and experiment as much as you can while you're young. The stakes are super low and you can learn a lot when you're experimenting young. On number 5, if a client has a budget lower than your fee, instead of saying no, simply lower down the scope, because by saying no, you end up losing the entire deal. However, by reducing the scope, you end up getting paid without discounting the value of your time. On number 6, if you're having issues getting paid for your work, try working for free for a good client that can refer you or share a strong testimonial. By getting the testimonial of someone strong, you can reach out to similar brands and eventually cover up for all the costs you missed first time. Make sure you comment below your favorite lessons. You'll be able to download a PDF of these notes for free via link in description. But even if I had to double click on this first testimonial client, do we find them on LinkedIn or are there some websites where we can put our profiles?
I think everywhere, wherever you can put stuff. I think part of the challenge of client service is that you're just trying to be top of mind for your ideal client, right? That's really what gets a lot of work. And, I'm biased in that most of my businesses have run mostly on word of mouth. Like we never did at my agency, Super Friendly, we never did any paid advertising. We didn't do any of that kind of stuff. It was mostly just word of mouth. And the trick there is whenever your ideal client is like, who should I get to make that website for us? You want to be the first or second at worst name that pops in their head. If you're on some list that's like, well, I don't know, let me make a list, and they have to sit down and think hard to come up with you, you're not high enough on their list. And so part of it is knowing where your audience lives. Does your audience is your target customer on LinkedIn all day? Well, then you should be plastering those testimonials all over LinkedIn. Is your target customer on Instagram or on YouTube or read your newsletter or industry trade magazines? Wherever they are reading, wherever they are looking, wherever they are watching, wherever they are consuming, you want your brand or your personal brand or your agency brand or whatever it is, you want it to show up there so that whenever they think, okay, we're ready to hire somebody for our website or for our product design or, whatever that is, they're like, you know what, we should go talk to Dan because I remember seeing Dan's thing just yesterday. And so you're top of mind for them.
So what would your thoughts be on the fact that I think clients don't really hire only for the experiences you design, but also the experience of working with you? I observe that almost every senior designer out there is like super fluent, super confident, like soft skills are on sorted for them. So do you think that also helps you stand apart?
I think so. I'm a big believer in the quote. I forget who said it, but people don't remember what you did. They remember how you made them feel. And I think that the experience of working with you is something that I think that testimonial goes longer than that person was a great designer or that person was a great engineer, because there's a lot of great designers out there, so it's hard to differentiate on like, well, I'm the best designer out there, that's why you should hire me, because clients don't know how to evaluate. We as designers don't even know how to evaluate it. How do you know if I'm a better designer than you? Like, there's no measurement, there's no test that we can take, there's no grading scale or anything like that. And so, at some level, a designer is a designer is a designer, and then it's all the other stuff around that really sings. I'm reminded of like Michelin star restaurants. What's the difference between a 2 Michelin star restaurant and a 3 Michelin star restaurant? It's not the food. It's all the stuff around the food. It's the service. It's the ambiance. It's the atmosphere. It's the experimentation. It's the creativity. It's all the stuff around it. It's not just the food. So same thing for designers. It's not just the design. At some level, good design is good design. But then it's about, does this person treat you well? Is the process of working with them fluid, simple, easy? Do they take work away from you? I think I put a lot of stock in that kind of stuff.
But then what have you been doing that is making your word of mouth so good? Like, is there something special that you do that your competitors are not able to copy?
They are able to copy it in a certain way. So I think like one of the advantages that I have is that I've had a blog for 17 years. Like, and it's weird to say now because I'm like, I'm not even that old, but for 17 years I've been blogging. I've been sharing my thoughts. And when Twitter, so this is before Twitter. So then when Twitter came along, I was sharing stuff on Twitter. And now that LinkedIn is popular, sharing stuff on LinkedIn. And that's part of who I am. I'm a sharer. I like sharing things. I like doing sharing the things that I do. And so that's my way of staying top of mind for clients. That is natural to me. Anyone can do that. It's not like I'm the only person on the internet with a blog, or I'm the only person on the internet with a YouTube channel, or with a, whatever that is. Anybody can do that. The hard part is staying consistent about it. Like one of the things that has grown the most for me over the last year is my newsletter. And that's because for the last, how many weeks? 60 weeks. I've written a newsletter once a week, every week. What I have not done is posted an Instagram photo once a week, every week. So my Instagram channel doesn't grow as much as my newsletter does, or as much as my blog does. So the things that I'm able to do consistently, that's where I see growth. And I think that that's true for anybody. Any of my competitors can do the same thing. They just don't. So it's not for lack of ability. It's just they don't do it. And they might have good reasons or bad reasons or whatever for doing that. But I think the consistency means a lot. And I'm learning that more and more as I get older and as I get more progressed in my career. Is the things that I'm consistent at are the areas that I see growth, and that's just not design. That's in my family life, that's in my basketball skills, that's all of those kinds of things that I do, my photography skills, like all of that stuff. Is if I'm doing it consistently, I will see growth there, and if I'm not, it's going to be hard to see growth there.
Where can we read this blog?
danmall.com is my website. I blog there at least once a week. I have a few other things. You can also get my newsletter there too. So danmall.com/newsletter. It goes out every Friday, and I'm very proud of saying, like, I write an email newsletter and it goes out every Friday, and it has for the last 60 weeks. Sometimes I'm writing it Friday morning, and sometimes I'm writing it in advance, but it's something that I've been pretty consistent at and kind of excited about.
And are you a big fan of documentation? Like, are you writing in your notebooks, or do you have an app for it?
I have all the things. I'm a big fan of capturing things. And part of that too is because I think my memory is going. Like, I think, like, I'm not even that old, but I think my memory is going to be the first thing to go. I don't think it's going to be my eyesight or my hearing, or I think it's going to be my memory. And so that's why I like taking photos. I like writing things down. I like capturing things, because sometimes I just don't remember stuff. And in order for me to remember it, I need some sort of cue to remember. So that's really why I started blogging in the first place, was I just wanted to remember stuff. And now I go back and I read my blog all the time. So I read it for me, because I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that project that I did in 2011. I forgot about this thing that happened. I forgot when the iPhone came out. I blogged about when the iPhone came out, and I stood in line for 4 hours to get the first iPhone. Like, I forgot that I did that until I went back and read my blog post. So I like capturing some of those things so that I can go back to them.
No, it's a super useful habit. I've been documenting my thoughts on Notions in the past, like 3-4 years. Everything I've learned neatly organized in pages. And I think documentation is everywhere around us. Like, even our biology, our genetics, our DNA is nature's way of documenting progress. So I saw your Instagram stories and I saw that you clicked these amazing pictures of, like, I think it was food items and like sushi. And it takes a lot of effort to curate Instagram stories, right? What makes you do that? What drives you to do that?
So a good example. It's a thing that I'm not very consistent about. So I don't have a good answer about that. I don't have a good answer as to what drives me to continually do that stuff. I will say right now what I'm content with for Instagram, because I don't know what I'm doing with Instagram. I think it's fun. I think it's interesting, but I don't have like a strategy, for what I'm doing there. So for me right now, it's like, let me just do what's authentic to me. And what's authentic to me is to share things that I like and share things that I enjoy. The photos that I posted the other day is a place that in Philadelphia, it's called Royal Sushi. It's my favorite restaurant. My wife and I love it. We go there once every 3 months, and it's amazing. It's delicious. The food looks beautiful. I always take my camera. I've made friends with the chef. I always send him my pictures afterwards, because he enjoys them too. And it's just a thing that I enjoy. And I think, maybe this is oversimplistic, but I think the world will be a little bit better if people just shared a lot of stuff that they enjoy, and that's it. Sharing what they enjoy because they enjoy it. I think, we could all probably use a little bit more of that.
And do you plan to make like typical Instagram, YouTube content anytime soon?
No, because I don't know what I'm doing with that yet. So I wouldn't know what I'm doing that for. I probably will figure that out in the next year, because I think, like, just in terms of my consumption habits, prior to this year, I didn't actually watch a lot of YouTube videos. But lately, I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos because I'm learning. And because I'm there a lot now I'm starting to feel the itch of going, like, what if I made more stuff here instead of just consuming stuff? So I think that those are how my cycles generally go, is like, sometimes I just consume and consume and consume until I'm ready to execute on something. And so I'm starting to feel the itch of going, like, I'm on Instagram a lot more now, consuming stuff because I'm inspired by it. I'm on YouTube a lot more now, consuming stuff because I watch a lot of stuff now on it. So I think I'm ready to start creating some stuff for it and seeing how that goes. I've done it a little bit, but nothing consistent, nothing to make it a habit. Probably 2025 is my prediction.
And are there any design creators that you watch and follow? Any recommendations?
Oh, design creator. I mean, probably all the usual suspects that a lot of people follow. Chris Do is a friend of mine, and I love the stuff that he does. Super inspiring, really inspirational. Not a lot of design creators. Mizco and the designership stuff. Like, I love the stuff that he does on Instagram and on YouTube. I'm also inspired by a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of business, things. Right now, mostly on YouTube, it's mostly NBA for me. So it's mostly following basketball videos, less so kind of on the creator side. But I'm learning learning more about that and kind of finding more and more people like that. And a lot of them just reaching out to them and actually just trying to be friends with them first before while following them and things like that.
Well, that makes sense. We've been trying to make content on design and AI for the past 2 years. We're working super hard to, fill in the gap for students who can't afford a design degree. Would there be any recommendations from you, any specific topics that we should focus on this year?
That's a tough one because I think I'm a believer both in self-education and higher education. So, I ran an apprenticeship because I thought, for 6 years I ran an apprenticeship, a design apprenticeship, because I didn't think that higher ed was cutting it. And on the same token, I'm very grateful to my higher education experience because that's where I got a lot of my start too. I didn't feel like I learned a lot in school, but I was exposed to a lot of good experiences. I did learn some in school too. So I think education, the state of education is really tough because of the expectations that people have. And specifically with design, I think a lot of people need a mentor. A lot of people need a director, a creative director, an art director. Like a lot of people don't learn without that. So I think there are some self-starters and some people who can watch a thing and learn the thing. With design, it's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of repetition. It's a lot of critique. It's a lot of practice and reps and things like that. So one of the ways that I find to kind of fill in that gap that I would encourage any creator or anybody that's making it, and same thing for you too, is like share stories. I think that there's a lot of theoretical instruction out there. I teach theoretical instruction too, but there's not a lot of stories about how things work in the real world, in practice. I try to share as much as I can about that stuff. So if I was going to start creating content more regularly, it would be around that. Like I have an advantage in being able to, I have a lot of stories to share. I've worked on a lot of different things for a lot of different companies. Some of them are NDA and I'll never be able to share them, but I can share some version of them, in a way that doesn't compromise anybody's integrity or anything like that. So, I want to see more of that stuff. Like, yes, teach the AI stuff, teach the design stuff, but share the story, share the case studies. How did it work when you worked with this one client? What did you charge them? How did they react to that? What were the feelings? Did you get depressed? What did you do next? I want to hear that kind of stuff. And I think that stuff resonates. And I think there's a lot of people who are really good at the theoretical stuff. And I think less people who are good at the storytelling around that. So I want to see more of that stuff.
And in a field that is so much evolving at every month, right? You would see new things coming in. People say that AI will replace us. Someday they say AR, VR is the next big thing. What do you think is the future of design?
I think the future of design is going to be very different than what it looks like now. I'm really excited for that. For a long time, and maybe this is just because I'm getting older and more bitter or whatever, but for a long time, design's been hard. In the same breath, I can say that design is easy and design is difficult. And both of those things are true. And so I think there's a lot of things that are barriers to creating for designers. Tools are one of those things. Access is another one of those things. Knowledge is another one of those things. And so what I love about AI, and there's definitely some dangerous and tough things about it. What I do love about AI is that it democratizes, or at least has the promise of democratizing design, and democratizing creation. And I think that's the gateway, at least for me. That's how people get into design, is they create something and they go, hey, that's not bad. I wonder if I spent 2 more hours on this, if I could make it a little bit better. And they become proud of the thing that they made. And so AI just reduces that barrier. I don't think it fills in the pride part because it's hard to feel like you made that thing. You wrote the prompt, sure, but you didn't really make that thing. AI remixed it based on, the data in the world. So there's still a little bit of a hurdle for you to get to the point where you're like, I'm proud because I made that thing. But the more you remix, the more you go, let's try this again with a different prompt, or let's try a different way. I think that it starts to fill in some of that gap for us. And so I think it's promising, and I think that in 5 years, design is going to look very different than it does right now. And I hope it does, because I think right now, Figma, things like Figma are great because they make it easy for people to jump in and design, especially compared to where I started. I started designing in Photoshop. I still design to this day in Photoshop, but I'm teaching my kids design right now because they're interested. And when my daughters open Figma, they're like, this is cool, I get this. When they open Photoshop, they're like, what are all these buttons? And I'm like, yeah, I get that. I know it because I've used it for 22 years. They don't quite know it, and learning all those tools, especially version 22 or 26 or whatever they're on, it's just too much. And so I think that I'm hoping that the tooling gets simpler and powerful, and more powerful at the same time. And I think AI is a really good example of that.
I think even without AI, when I use a tool like Spline or Framer, you see the barriers between developers and designers just diminishing. Do you feel that eventually all of us designers would start to code, or maybe coders would start to design? Do you see that happening?
I mean, further than that, even like I want to design with our words. I want it to be Minority Report. For anybody that's seen that movie, I want interface elements to appear in the air, and I want to wave them back and forth with my hands and with gestures, and I want to say, let's try more red on that, and then have it appear red. 10 years ago, that seems like straight up science fiction, but I don't know. I mean, like, if you look, the Vision Pro is coming out soon. Like that already. Like Oculus, like I have an Oculus in my house, and my kids are playing with it, and they are able to create and do things in that. That doesn't seem that far off now, like if you think about it. And so I think, yeah, the gateway might be designers learning to code and coders learning to design, but I think I'm hoping that we just leapfrog past that stage and go, just, can you say it? Can Siri do it? Can Alexa do it? Can AI do it? Where we just say, I want to design an interface that has this thing and that thing and red over here in the corner with a button that does that. We already have seen examples of that happening. There's a lot of prototypes out there today of how, a few years ago even, that we saw that. So to me, I'm like, whether that's 10 years away or 20 years away, I don't know, but it feels like it's in the near future somewhere.
For the past 4 months, I've been learning about spatial design. I think Apple has done a great job with the Vision Pro documentation. And we try to make some videos on our YouTube channel, but like people didn't watch it. I feel like people are not very bullish about it. Are you bullish about this future of AR and VR and Apple Vision Pro?
I'm bullish about it because of where I am and the kind of work that I'm doing. I feel like it's a long tail thing. Like I feel like, there are some YouTube videos that just don't catch, and then one day they do. And then they just got 300 views, and and then something happens. A year later, it's like the thing blows up. So I've never been good at predictions, but if I were to predict, I think it's probably going to be something like that. That like the people who are investigating the content now, it's worth the investment. That soon, like once the industry catches it, I think it's going to catch.
No, that's very true. You won't believe we've gone from 80K to 320K in 6 months.
Incredible.
Like,
Wow.
we were stuck at 80K for like 1.5, 2 years. And then I sat down and I realized that YouTube is actually a science. And there's a very specific way to grow. And you're right. Like some of my videos were very unpopular 2 years ago, and they just blew up in the last 2-3 months.
Yep. And it's weird. Like, I think it's fun to do that kind of work too, is to go like, is it the title? Is it the thumbnail? Is it this thing? Does it need to be recirculated somewhere? Do we need to redo a version of it? Like, I think that's part of the fun of design, of just looking at a thing and going like, I've got some ideas about how to make this better. So I see that all as a design exercise. And I think that's part of what's fun about being part of this, like, the last decade of creator economy.
And what are you learning these days? Are you upskilling yourself for something new?
I'm trying to learn a bunch of different things, both related to design and not related to design. I've enjoyed photography a lot lately, and trying to get better at that. Not for any reason other than I like it. I've been trying to learn more basketball moves because I've been playing basketball every 2 weeks. A couple times a week. And so I've been trying to learn, new things there, and that's both frustrating and exciting. And then in terms of design, one of the things that I've decided lately that was kind of a big thing for me was I decided that I don't want to be a web designer anymore. So I've decided that I'm not going to be designing and building sites myself, and instead actually going to be working with people who do that really well, and really focus on how can I be a better creative director, how can I be a better visionary, how can I be a better CEO and founder and entrepreneur and things like that, and how can I be building better visions in the world and then working with teams that way. So I'm learning about how to do a lot of that kind of stuff, and all of the skills that I have in the past, kind of come to the table with that, where like I do know code, I do know design, I do know how to use these tools. Hopefully that makes me a better collaborator with the folks that I'm working with, as opposed to a micromanager, which I could see it going that way too. But what I'm trying to learn is how can I use the skills of design more broadly than being a UI designer or a graphic designer. How can I take the approach of design and apply it to something a little bit bigger that has more impact?
That's very, very cool. And do you read from books? Do you watch YouTube videos? Like, what does your learning process look like?
Books, a lot of books. You can't see it now, but my office is a library, so I've got books all over the room right now. So I read a lot. I read physical books. I listen to Audible all the time. I'm always reading. And then I fill that in a little bit with like Instagram. I'm sorry, not Instagram. YouTube. Been watching and learning a lot of stuff in YouTube. And then also I take a lot of courses. One, because I want to support creators and people who are sharing the things that they know and the things that they have, both free and paid and all that stuff. And then also because people, like, it's such a cheap way to get education. Relatively speaking, I could pay tens of thousands of dollars at a university, or I could pay like $500 for somebody's like specialized course on a particular thing that they do. I'm like, that seems like a no-brainer. If I've got the money, it seems like an easy shortcut to get somebody's like specialized knowledge. So I'm really into that stuff lately.
And are there any top books that you would recommend that completely changed the way you think?
Oh man, I love this question. Oh, I wish I was more prepared for it. Thank you for asking that. Yes, there are some top books. The most recent one that I can think of is Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. That was a very transformative book for me last year. It just changed my whole approach to business and the way that I think about things. Another book that was from a couple of years ago is the book called Drive by Dan Pink. It talks about what motivates people. And I think about that book daily. I think about some of the lessons that I've learned in that. I've got a ton more books, but I'll stop there at least. Those two books have been really, really beneficial and helpful for me.
No, that is insane. And thank you so much for sharing all of this in such candid detail, Dan. I am pretty sure that a lot of students are going to love this. And what we do is we usually create notes of the entire podcast and we give them a summary in the middle, at the end, so that they can download. And what we usually do is, so folks, you already know the drill. Whatever you've learned from the episode, make sure you document your learnings, create a carousel, put a tweet, make sure you tag me and Dan. And we would love to see what you wrote and learned from the episode.
Yeah. Have you read Building a Second Brain? Do you know that book?
No, but I think I know what it would mean.
Yeah, it's probably right up your alley. It's, if you've been documenting a lot of the Notion stuff, it's by Tiago Forte. I read it last year, and it's really about how you create a personal knowledge management system. And so I learned a lot from that book and a lot of the stuff that he's been posting both on YouTube and in the book itself. And so that's another book that kind of came to mind around that stuff. So yeah, I would love to see what people capture, how they kind of organize that stuff. And so yeah, please do tag me in that stuff, and I would love to reshare it as well.
Now, before we end this episode, here are some important reminders. Aim to be the first person that comes to your client's mind whenever they need someone like you. Build a reliable personal brand and a portfolio. Start with curation of content and go text first on LinkedIn and Twitter. Once you become good at writing, then attempt short form video. Once you do short form well, eventually transition to long form content. Talk about your projects on LinkedIn. Be connected to the right people. Attend relevant events. It's not just about being good at something. You need to crack visibility. Your face and name should always be the top choice. And in the end, here are some important book recommendations from Dan. Number 1, Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. Number 2, Drive by Dan Pink. And number 3, Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte. You can download a PDF of these notes for free via link in description. Make sure you click on subscribe and hit the bell icon because we regularly upload videos on tech, design, and upskilling. Thank you so much, Dan, for doing this, and I hope to meet you soon in Bangalore and wish you all the very best for everything ahead in life.
Likewise, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on the show. You're doing an amazing, inspiring job. Thank you for having me. And yeah, would love to finally meet in person someday.
If you liked watching this podcast, then do check out this episode as well. I am super sure that you will again find a lot of inspiration.